Before we begin, let me get this out of the way first. It is still very safe to travel by air. The fact is, you have more chances of winning the lottery than for a plane you're riding to have a major malfunction. With that out of the way, today we're going to talk about heroic pilots who have turned something potentially tragic to something that has a silver lining. I'm talking about landing a doomed airplane on water of all places. Number 1 even ended up with the pilot earning tons of awards and commendations, so stay tuned to learn more about that as we give you 5 unbelievable airplane water landings. Number 5. PANAM Flight 6. In 1956, PANAM Flight 6, a Boeing 377 Stratocruiser, took off from Honolulu on a nighttime flight to San Francisco. Little did the crew and the passengers know that they would be making history along the way. During the flight, PANAM Flight 6 was halfway across the Pacific Ocean when it developed some engine trouble. The 4-engine plane initially only had one of its 4 engines down, but in just moments of the first engine failing, a second one started to have trouble as well. Down on 2 engines, the airplane was ascending into the dark waters below. The plane was barely able to stay airborne, but the pilots knew they had time to think of the best course of action to take. One option was to keep flying until daylight before attempting an emergency landing. Another option was to jettison fuel and try to land on the water immediately. One thing was for sure though, the damaged engines were sucking up more fuel than they were supposed to, making reaching San Francisco or even flying back to Honolulu an impossible task. The decision was made to wait until morning, which in hindsight was the best decision the pilot made. The aircraft successfully made the water landing with all 24 passengers and 7 crew walking out alive, making PANAM Flight 6 the first flight in history to land on the ocean with everyone surviving. Number 4. AEROFLOT 2124. Murphy's Law is in full effect in this story because almost everything that could go wrong on a flight happened here. AEROFLOT Tupolev 2124 was scheduled to fly from Tallinn Airport in Estonia to Moscow Vnukovo International Airport. The 2124, registered as CCCP 45021, carried 44 passengers and 7 crew members. Its trouble started even before takeoff, but was only discovered after the fact when the ground crew noticed a bolt had detached from the aircraft and was lying on the runway. This caused the landing gear to not retract fully, sticking out from the belly of the airplane halfway. The flight would have returned to Moscow Vnukovo to do a belly landing, but permission was denied due to heavy fog. They were then rerouted to St. Petersburg to do an emergency landing at the Pulkovo Airport. When circling St. Petersburg to reduce its fuel load, a requirement when doing emergency landings to lessen the added danger of the jet fuel catching fire, the crew had a brilliant idea. They were going to cut a hole at the bottom of the plane from the inside and use a long pole to push the landing gears back into place. The plan would have probably worked, but Murphy's Law once again reared its ugly head. This time the fuel gauges were defective and reporting that the plane had more fuel than it actually had. They only found that they no longer had fuel when the engine stopped running. Now, landing in Pulkovo Airport is no longer an option, so the pilot decided to do a water landing on the Neva River. As the 2124 glided and nearly missed the Alexander Nevsky Bridge, the pilot gently landed the aircraft on the Neva. However, as the plane touched down, the fuselage broke. Water started coming in and the Tupolev started sinking. Luckily though, a tugboat was nearby and arrived near the ditched jet. The tugboat carried the 2124 to a nearby pier, where everyone on board disembarked without any injuries. Local authorities recovered the aircraft 2 days later. Number 3. ALM Flight 980. ALM Antillean Airlines Flight 980 was a flight scheduled to fly from John F. Kennedy International Airport in New York City to Princess Juliana International Airport in Saint Martin, Netherlands Antilles. The flight carried 57 passengers and 6 crew. The flight crew consisted of Captain Ballsy DeWitt, First Officer Harry Evans II, and Navigator Hugh Hart. Flight 980 made a normal departure from Kennedy Airport and had an uneventful flight to the Caribbean. After the flight was given clearance to descend to 10,000 feet, regional air traffic control advised that weather in Saint Martin wasn't really ideal for a safe landing. With that, Captain DeWitt decided the best course of action was to take a detour to San Juan. He was already well on his way when air traffic control radioed again, this time informing the captain that the weather had improved and landing would now be possible. So the captain then turned his plane around back to Saint Martin. He lined up for the landing, but due to the bad weather, he failed to see the runway in time, missing his first landing attempt. He tried a second landing attempt with the same results. They tried yet another time, and this time the aircraft was too high on the approach, so the landing had to be aborted yet again. After assessing the weather and fuel situation, the crew elected to divert to St. Croix. While doing so, the crew discovered a fatal error. There was a massive discrepancy between the fuel gauge readings and what had been computed as the amount of fuel remaining. In short, they didn't have enough fuel to land in St. Croix. The crew decided to attempt a water landing in the Caribbean Sea 30 miles off the coast of St. Croix. Amazingly, everything happened without the passengers knowing anything of the situation. You see, the PA system on the aircraft wasn't working, and although the pilot flashed the seatbelt prior to ditching in the water, the passengers were still completely in the dark as to what was about to happen. And unfortunately, due to this lack of info about what was going on, 23 people lost their lives in this incident. Now it's time for today's best pick. Today's pick is a weird story that may or may not have involved the use of illegal drugs. What's certain is that the crew never intended to make a water landing, but did so unknowingly anyway. Curious to find out more? Well, it's coming next with number 2. Lion Air Flight 904. Lion Air Flight 904 was a scheduled domestic passenger flight from Hussein Sastranegara International Airport in Bandung to Negara Rai International Airport in Bali, Indonesia. On the 13th of April 2013, the Boeing 737-800 operating the flight crashed into water short of runway while on final approach to land. There were 2 pilots and 5 flight attendants with 101 passengers on board, consisting of 95 adults, 5 children, and 1 infant. 97 passengers were Indonesian, 1 French, 1 Belgian, and 2 Singaporean. 6 of the crew were Indonesian, while 1 man came from India. The Indonesian National Transportation Safety Committee published a preliminary report on May 15, 2013. Flight data show that the aircraft continued to descend below the minimum descent altitude, 466 feet from ground level. The report found that at 890 feet, the first officer reported that the runway was not in sight. At approximately 151 feet, the pilot again stated that they could not see the runway. Flight data showed that the pilots attempted to perform a go-around at approximately 20 feet, which proved too late as the aircraft made contact with the water's surface moments later. All this information was gathered from the plane's flight data recorder. However, no instances of mechanical, electrical, nor instrumental failure which might indicate to a possible cause of the crash. Thus, investigators had to look into a different cause of the accident: human error. In January 2017, Buddy Waseso, the chief of Indonesia's National Narcotics Agency, said that the pilot of Lion Air Flight 904 was under the influence of drugs at the time of the accident, and had hallucinated that the sea was part of the runway. Apparently, Lion Air employees had a history with illegal drugs. In January of 2012, a number of crew members had been found in possession of crystal meth. Their licenses were understandably revoked. However, that claim is at odds with the statement made after the accident by Indonesia's Transport Ministry, which said the pilots had not tested positive for drugs. Fortunately, there is some good news that came out of this incident. All passengers and crew came out relatively unharmed from the unfortunate crash, with only a few having minor injuries. Before we move on, do me a favor. My analytics show that only about 15% of you watching are actually subscribed. Come on guys, what's up with that? Can you guys please hit the subscribe button? You guys watch my videos every day anyway, so you might as well subscribe and keep up to date with every video we put out. Number 1. US Airways Flight 1549. On January 15, 2009, US Airways Flight 1549 was scheduled to fly from New York City's LaGuardia Airport to Charlotte Douglas. The aircraft was an Airbus A320, one of the biggest at the time. How is this information relevant? Well, you'll find out soon enough. The captain and pilot in command was 57-year-old Chelsea B. Sullenberger, a former fighter pilot who had been an airline pilot since leaving the United States Air Force in 1980. At the time, he had logged 19,663 total flight hours, including 4,765 in an A320. He was also a glider pilot and expert on aviation safety. Again though, why is this information important to the story? Just be patient, I'm getting right into it. You see, Flight 1549 is the biggest aircraft to have ever been forced down by bird strikes, and Captain Sullenberger, also known as Captain Sully, is the first and only person to have ever flown such a massive airplane unpowered and landing it safely with 0 casualties. What happened was, just a few minutes after taking off, the plane struck a flock of Canada geese at an altitude of about 3,000 feet. That isn't the altitude for where bird strikes can occur. The pilot's view was filled with the large birds. Passengers and crew heard very loud bangs and saw flames from the engines, followed by silence and an odor of fuel. Realizing that both engines had shut down, Sullenberger tried desperately to restart the engines, but to no avail. The plane began a rapid descent. At this point, Sully radioed a mayday, but was quickly thinking of a way to save the passengers. He initially asked permission to do an emergency landing in New Jersey's Teterboro Airport, but he soon realized they weren't going to make it that far. He then decided to land the plane in the Hudson River. And so he did successfully, landing the massive aircraft in the Hudson River with no fatalities or even major injuries. Captain Sully was given honors upon honors for his successful landing, and for saving the lives of hundreds of people. The incident has since been called the Miracle on the Hudson. Know of any more epic airplane water landing stories? Let us know down below in the comments. Make sure you also check out the channel's other amazing videos. As always, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Later, everybody!